Thank you again, Todd, for inviting me to come back to the back to the podium again. Many of you may have seen me speak on Thursday, where I spoke about my experience and the way that I manage a residency at the Studio Museum in Harlem. And in many ways, it's a very traditional residency program. It is one that is about bringing 3 artists every year to Harlem. We give them a vast variety of resources, space, money, a show, time. And it is a residency that is very much based on this sort of, what I like to say, a monastic model of a residency, a very traditional one. The artist is there, the artists focus independently on their work and on their practice. But as Todd mentioned, I have a sort of schizophrenic way about me, and I am also on the board of a community-based project called the Laundromat Project that in addition to doing sort of public artworks, has a residency situation set up for artists who want to engage with a public and with the community. So it's not about sort of providing a platform for just sort of introversion, but it is a platform for a kind of extroverted practice. So there are 2 projects in specific that the Laundromat does. The first is called Create Change, and it's the formal residency project by which 3 artists every year are invited to work with the Laundromat Project and literally produce a series of programs inside of, well, laundry washing facilities in Brooklyn. And the second one is called Works in Progress. And this project is set up for artists who would like to do educational projects with their works. So it may not be necessarily about producing one public art project, but it is still about engaging a public or a group of people who are not necessarily a kind of traditional art audience. And by way of history, I should say that, well, I'll back up and just say I think the model for the Laundromat Project, in sort of opposition to this kind of monastic model that I spoke of, is really what I like to call a practicum. And those of you familiar with sort of education would know that term as the period by which a teacher goes into training under the tutelage of a sort of master teacher or what have you before they become an independent teacher. So I think this practicum model for the residency is one that's really effective for the Laundromat Project. But a little history about the Laundromat Project is that it was founded 5 years ago by a woman named Risa Wilson. And Risa is a resident of Bed-Stuy, as am I and Todd, right in his backyard. And what she had sort of observed in Bed-Stuy was that the Laundromat was a massive place of gathering for the community. And there are several reasons for this. Bed-Stuy is a relatively economically depressed neighborhood, and even though it has the largest historic population of black homeowners in the country, it's a sort of black and Latino neighborhood now that really has a lower economic level generally than the rest of the country. Definitely less than many parts of New York. It also has a higher sort of unemployment level than many parts of the nation. And in addition to that, about 80% of the inhabitants of Bedford-Stuyvesant rent their homes or rent an apartment. So they're not homeowners traditionally. And as renters, many of them are in sort of large buildings where there are no laundry facilities. So then what you get are sort of several small businesses that are in fact laundromats. And so you have 80% of this neighborhood sort of coming to this place where they have to do this sort of domestic work with a lot of spare time. So here's a shot of a kind of laundromat in Bed-Stuy that in fact does have an installation from the Laundromat Project in there. Risa Wilson, founding the Laundromat Project, really wanted to do 2 things with this program. And one is she wanted to found an organization based on the principles of social entrepreneurship. And as such, the idea was that the project would grow into a profit-making business that would then fund the nonprofit segment of the organization. So that right now the Laundromat Project is in a phase where we're producing programs, but the idea is literally the organization would buy a laundromat, a sort of large one, make money with that, and use those funds for the programs, the public art programs. But secondly, if the space is large enough, the idea is that we would then also have workshops in the space. It could be a sort of proper studio space for artists and so forth and so on. And so there is this kind of notion that's almost very popular, I think, right now for a lot of fledgling nonprofit institutions who are facing sort of budget cuts from foundations, budget cuts from the governments, and that is, how do we sustain the money money coming in for the project. And for many of these organizations, the solution is to find some sort of income stream that will then fund their sort of nonprofit wing. But the second thing that I think is super important for me personally as a sort of cultural worker is the idea that the Laundromat Project is very specific about engaging its public. And so one thing that I think that comes up often in this question of sort of what does an artist do when an artist is engaging in the public, or one thing that does not come up, I think, is the definition of what that public is. And I think the Laundromat Project has been very specific in kind of engaging a very specific public in an urban community. And we're talking, as I said before, sort of economically depressed communities of color in New York. And I think that sort of specificity is very important in thinking about both where the programs are housed, but also what kind of programs you do. And then in training for the artists and the residencies, the idea is they should always be aware of that audience when creating their projects. And so I think a very good example here is a woman named Stephanie Dinkins, who at a laundromat created a bench. The bench is made of books, and so that people who go and do their laundry and have to be there for, say, 2 hours or so, can come outside and actually read the books while they're waiting, so it becomes this kind of social sculpture, but at the same time, this really great tool for education during one's leisure time. And then there's another sort of more ambitious project by an artist named Rudy Shepard, who literally built out this container on the corner outside of a laundromat in Harlem, where he made a drawing center, and he sort of taught drawing classes to youth in Harlem. And so the idea is that the public in and of itself is not a sort of catch-all term. It's not just sort of anyone who comes by. It's not a non-traditional art audience, but it's a very specific group of people. And what we ask the artists at the Laundromat to do is really ask yourself, who is your public? And what does your public do? And how can you then make interventions into their habits and sort of habitus of their everyday life? And I think that's deeply important too, because then you also, I believe, when one talks about a sort of public practice, you automatically assume it's a civic good. But I think unless that civic sort of population is defined, then you're in a kind of, I don't know, wishy-washy territory. So I don't know if that's 5 minutes, I'll sort of stop there, but I just want to, no, I'll just wrap up and then say that one thing that's also wonderful about the Laundromat Project, as Todd mentioned, is that it is scalable. And so not only is it sort of hoping to grow into a kind of business, but the idea is that it's moved out of the literal laundromat as well, and that it also does projects outside of Bed-Stuy, across communities of color in New York, and also that it's housing its programs in other institutions and other businesses aside from laundromats. So I'm very excited to see where these sort of questions and these foci take the project in the future. Thank you.